Good evening, known world. I am Excellency Rahmut al-Tayyiba, coming to you out of the barony of Bronsholm in the Kingdom of Artemisia. And with me tonight is Excellency Mark de Wytteney. Is that how I say it?
That's exactly how you say it.
Wanted to make sure I'm like that extra E. Mark, would you please introduce yourself, Your Excellency, and tell us why you are an amazing human being?
Oh, well, I will at least introduce myself. I don't know how amazing I am, but I do my best. As I said, my name is Mark de Wytteney. I have been in the SCA for over 20 years. And for most of that time that I've been playing, I have been involved in shadowlanding activities. I have been a shadowlane for multiple groups. I was Kingdom Shadowlane for a brief period. Unfortunately, some life circumstances made me step down early, but it was still an excellent experience. And I learned a lot about bringing people in and keeping people in. So it's one of my passions. Introducing new people to our hobby is one of my favorite things to do in the SCA.
Perfect. Thank you. So before we dive into Shadowlane, and just a little sidebar, I have to tell you, your picture of you and your Fallout costume makes the gaming heart go pitter-patter, because who does not love Fallout? And you even have Nuka-Cola hanging from your utility belt.
I do. Actually, it's hard to see on that picture. I also had a bobblehead hanging off my utility belt. I had my lunchbox that was filled with bottle caps. It was a great time. I wore that as one of my cosplays to Dragon Con, which is one of our large science fiction conventions, science fiction and fantasy conventions here on the East Coast. And it was fantastic. I had a great experience with it. Met up with a bunch of other Fallout cosplayers, and it was a great time.
I just had to compliment you, because I definitely approve happily of your cosplay and admire it greatly.
Yeah, it is one of my all-time favorite game series. Like it's one of those things that, as much as I love all the medieval stuff I do, I love Fallout probably just as much.
Nice. Very, very nice. Well, obviously loving something that you do makes it easier to share your passion about it with other people. You've been Shadowlane. Do you want to talk about the different levels that you've held for offices for Shadowlane, or?
Sure. So when I first started out, honestly, I kind of fell into the Shadowlane position. The group that I was with didn't actually have a full Shadowlane. It was one of those things where one of the other officers in the group was kind of doing dual duty. They had that as their office as well. But as anybody who knows me can tell you, I like to talk a lot. And so it just became natural. Like, people would walk up and like, "What are you doing?" And I would just go into a spiel, at a fighter practice, and telling them, "Oh, well, we're the Society for Creative Anachronism, and what we do is," and I would go into this whole spiel. And at some point, that officer, our seneschal, came to me and was like, "So, what do you think about being an officer?" And I took the position, and really enjoyed it. I enjoy being a cog in the machine that makes our society run, because as much fun as it is to go and play and have a lot of fun, it takes work, and I like knowing that I contribute to that work, that I add to, that I give back something to a group that has given me so much.
Well, and having been a Shadowlane myself, I mean, it definitely is a role that people do tend to kind of get pushed into sometimes.
Right.
But it's definitely a role that is completely necessary.
Right.
I'm not saying that the other officer roles aren't, but the Shadowlane really is. I mean, they're the welcome committee. They're the they're deputy to the seneschal. They know policies just as well as a seneschal sometimes.
Right.
They're the ones that are going to use that enthusiasm and passion to get other people either interested or remain engaged.
Right. And honestly, a good Shadowlane and a bad Shadowlane can make or break whether a new person stays with the group. In fact, my first experience with the SCA was a fairly negative one. A little over, it was about 25, 26 years ago, I tried to join a local group. And at the time, the local group was going through some internal politics, as happens. And there was a lot of cliquishness going on, but I couldn't get anyone to talk to me. And I tried. I went to multiple practices. I went to multiple, like classes and meetings that they had, and nobody would talk to me. And I was like, well, I'm going to go do my own thing then. And so I did. I spent several years where I just kind of ran my own little medieval group. And then I relocated to Georgia, to Meridies. And on our way out here, my wife at the time was like, if you want to do medieval stuff, you got to find somebody to do it with, because you're not running another group. Too much work. And I'm like, yeah, that's fair. And so I reached out to the group we were going to with the Shire of Tierbrist in Meridies. And my experience could not have been more different. I reached out to the Seneschal, who, like I said, at this time was also doing double duty as chatelaine. And she was amazing. She really kind of connected with me and was like, what are you guys getting here? Blah, 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 blah. So that the day that we pulled in, she had people ready to come and help us unload our truck and get us set up. And they threw a barbecue for us to welcome us to the town. Like, it was an extraordinary experience. And that really kind of set my expectations and understanding of what a chatelaine does.
And there's a comment in our chat from Jason Porter, Aslak. Master Aslak points out that the chatelaine is so important, especially with large groups. We just have to remember we're all chatelaine when it comes down to it. And yes, I agree with that statement. And at the same time, also disagree, because not everybody is best suited to be a chatelaine.
Right.
Sometimes they are better to help assist a chatelaine. But regardless of the size, chatelaine is such a crucial, needed role that needs to be filled.
Right.
Obviously, you had a bad chatelaine experience where you were before, where nobody would talk to you.
Right.
Then you've also had a good one. So some people are just better suited for that. And I don't know if it's a personality type. Sometimes it can be a little of both, a communication style. And sometimes it's the knowledge. Like, people honestly want to help and they're very passionate about the SCA, but don't have the knowledge or the know-how to kind of direct people and facilitate.
Right, certainly. And honestly, though, I think what it really comes down to, I think probably the biggest, most important part of being a chatelaine is your ability to network and connect to people. If you know all the people who do all the things, you don't have to know those things yourself. So that when somebody comes to you and they've got an interest in calligraphy, or somebody has an interest in weaving, or they have an interest in fighting, or they have an interest in armor, or what have you, you don't have to be an expert on that. But you should know who is, so that you can get them over to them and have enough understanding of to bring that, to encourage that passion, to kind of stoke that fire while you get them to the expert who can kind of fill in the details.
So with that networking, is there a strategy that you in as chatelaine, or just even as a SCA member, employ to help kind of share that knowledge base for networking for others? Or
certainly, yeah. So I mean, honestly, what it comes down to is being social. I'm a kind of a social monster. I love people. I'm definitely an extrovert, and I'm not saying you have to be an extrovert to be a good chatelaine. Some of the best chatelaines that I have known have been very introverted people, but they know a lot, and they know a lot of people. They know who the right people are to talk to, and they get you in that direction. But really, yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to is who do you know, and how can you kind of file that in your head, and whether that is just like you can make a facial connection, like, okay, I know that that Master Michael does amazing armory and blacksmithing, and I keep that in my head, so that when I've got a new person coming in, they're like, I really want to do blacksmithing and make knives. I'm like, hey, I know who you need to talk to, and I can get them in that direction, really. It's just about, to be a good chatelaine, you have to kind of know your group. You got to know the people who are in it. You got to know the people what they do and why they do it and what they're interested in. As was mentioned in that comment earlier, yes, everyone in the group has to be a chatelaine of sorts, because you never know who's going to come up to who and start asking questions. But sometimes the easiest way to be that shadow lane, if you don't know anybody, is just to know who your shadow lane is, and say, "Hey, yeah, this is what we're doing. Let me bring you over to Mark. He'll tell you all the cool details."
Yes, exactly.
And that's key. You don't have to know everything. You just have to know how to push them in the right direction,
and not over push.
Not over push, precisely.
Yep. Just like Aslak had mentioned, and some of us won't shut up. All of us kind of have those moments where we just keep going as shadow lanes, whether we're good or bad shadow lanes. Sometimes it just happens.
Oh yeah.
And good shadow lanes kind of learn that skill of reeling themselves in and like, okay,
right.
whoa, too much information. I'm going to over inundate this poor individual. Need to cut
right.
back. And a good shadow lane also knows, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't introduce them to everybody who heavy fights. Maybe introduce them to just one person.
Precisely. Yep. Very much so. Very much so. Get one person to be their connection. Somebody, and that helps a lot in getting them feeling like they have that kind of one-on-one connection to somebody. They feel more important that way. And that way they're not having to remember a slew of names, a slew of people, a slew of faces. They got one person. They can remember one person's name.
And they only have to remember one of the names for that one person. They don't have to remember both.
Right, exactly.
That's the one thing I always feel when I was shadow lane. Look, this is, Sir So-and-so. He also goes by Bruce.
Right. Now, see, so, I cheated in that in the SCA, I am Baron Mark de Wytteney. And out of the SCA in my regular life, I am Mark Baron. So it kind of worked out.
You cheated. You cheated good. But, if it works for what you want for your persona, do it.
Yeah, exactly it.
Baron Mark Baron. Yeah, my name would work. Part of my name would work. My first and middle name would work for one persona. My last name would work for another. But none of them got used because I didn't want to go either route.
Right.
So I know we had talked before the show about engagement.
Right.
What is one of your key, I guess, tricks or techniques to ensure that people are engaged in the SCA?
Honestly, it is to get them actively involved in doing something. When I first started shadow laning, I gave away so much stuff. I made so much armor and just gave it away, and dozens and dozens of suits of armor that I just made and gave out, and get people on the field. And what I learned is when you give somebody something, they'll show up once or twice, but then they just kind of walk away. But if you say, "Hey, come to my house and I'll help you make your suit of armor," and you may do a large majority of the work, but they're still there, and you're teaching them to rivet, and you're teaching them to, add straps and do the things that they're going to need to do for basic repairs as a fighter anyway. This is obviously just on the fighter side. You can apply this to any field, but when you get them actively involved in the activity, that's when they come back. That's when they have an investment. That's when they've put their personal time into being a part of the group. And that is the key to keeping people involved in being engaged is having that personal connection. And it goes back to, like I said, when that first bad experience, I couldn't make a connection with anybody. I was enthusiastic. I came into the group with a lot of ideas and a lot of knowledge and skill sets that would have been fantastic. I mean, I've been doing calligraphy since I was 9 years old. I have always been into this kind of stuff. And I couldn't get anybody to encourage me or to give me or to put me in the right direction, give me a project. Had that happened, I would have been involved 5 years earlier than I was.
Darn that bad shadow lane.
Well, and I say that, and I want to say, like, it's gonna happen. Groups go through things. There's an ebb and flow to every organization, whether it is the SCA, whether it is something like the Freemasons or anything like that. Any organization you can think of, any kind of group where you have a social. There's going to be times where that group will go through periods that they just aren't super welcoming to outsiders. and that's where, unfortunately, that's where you have to have somebody who's really good at still maintaining that portion of things and being able to kind of be that liaison between a new person and those cliques, right?
And reach out to them.
And reach out to them, right? If you've got somebody who can do that, and can get people, so can get them into those kind of insular little groups, then you can still be successful in recruiting and retaining people. But it is definitely a skill that is it's learnable, but it's not one that everybody has. And unfortunately, honestly, as important as the Chatelain's position is, it's not one of the great offices, right? It's not one of the big ones that a lot of people are like, oh, well, this is the big important one that's going to get me, fancy recognition and what have you. That's what a lot of people think. But there are plenty of people who have received their service awards for their fantastic work in chatelaine.
This is true. But a chatelaine kind of is that gateway position. Like,
absolutely.
If you want a position where you really get kind of a view of the society, and be able to share your enthusiasm, that's a really good one, because you're networking with the Knight Marshals, you're networking with the Minister of Arts and Science. So those are the two activities, like, the big activities that we have.
Right.
You're networking with the Seneschal for, hey, is there an event coming up? Are you looking for volunteers? Maybe there's a newcomer who would do amazing as a Lord or Lady in Waiting,
Right.
Maybe there's an opportunity in that. So you kind of get to know those different offices and what's coming up. So what events are coming up, what practices are coming up, what get-togethers are coming up, and what is needed and what's expected.
Right. And sometimes, like, it's also like, organizing ride shares. I know a lot of the biggest successes that I have had in recruiting and retaining have been from college students, and a lot of times they don't have the budget to travel to an event and things like that. And so if you're really serious about wanting to be a good chatelaine, sometimes it is, putting out that call to the group. Hey, who's going to this event? Does anybody have extra space that a kid can ride in with you? This new member can jump in with you. And finding ways to help kind of offset the cost of new members going to events and things like that. We have a really great program that is being headed up here in Meridies by Her Grace Ismay and Her Excellency Dala. They really put a lot of work into homecoming, where they kind of do fundraisers to work as reimbursements for newcomers, so that a newcomer can come to their first event for free. And that can be a huge thing for a college student who really wants to be involved but doesn't have the kind of financial capability to do so.
Or a young family,
or a young family
with multiple children.
Yep.
There's so many individuals that don't necessarily have the funds to get started. But if you give them a taste and then say, hey, you don't have to necessarily have the money, we'll show you how to make the things so you don't have to go and buy the things.
Right.
You could get them kind of hooked that way.
Exactly. And that was a huge portion of my strategy with a lot of people is just, show them that it doesn't have to be a crazy big expense. Now, yeah, if you want to go out and you want to buy a bunch of stuff because you don't want to put the work in, you can absolutely do that. Here are some great people that you can buy from that I recommend. But if you can't do that, like here, let's figure out ways to get you involved and get you, we can have a night where we make garb for you, and I can teach you to make a simple tea tunic in a couple hours, and you'll have really easy garb, and you don't. I always stress specifically for newcomers, you don't have to be super fancy from the start. Like, I actually recommend go generic, wear something just basic until you see what you really like. I know my personal experience when I first started in the SEA, I started off as a 16th century Spaniard. And I had, my persona was Bastiano Francisco de Valencia, and had all these great ideas of what I wanted to do and all these things. And then when I actually got involved, I found out that, I really actually kind of like 14th century England and the way that the garb looks and the way that the armor looks. And that all appealed to me more than the 16th century stuff did. And eventually I changed my persona name, and I'd already started adapting the garb and wearing the garb. if I had just kind of started off as kind of generic guy for a little bit and kind of got my feet wet and seen what I actually really liked, it would have been helpful. And so I try to encourage that for new people is, it's fine if you have a passion for something. You come in and you're like, I really like Elizabethan and I want to do all the Elizabethan stuff. Like, cool, let's do it. I know the people for you to talk to. But if you come in and you're like, well, that's kind of cool. I kind of want to do this. I kind of let's put you in a T-tunic, come to an event, see what you really like.
Definitely. Cal points out that he knows it's another role to fill, but does our chatelaine need to have a deputy that focuses on the later stage retention instead of just day one recruitment?
So that is...
I mean,
a good question. That's a good question.
As an officer, having a deputy is always
having a deputy is always fantastic. It is not a bad idea. I would endorse it 100%. The problem is it's hard enough to find people to be chatelaine, and that's the sad of it is that finding people who want to take the role, even just as a standard deputy, can be challenging. And so, can you, if you have a group that's big enough and has enough people interested that want to fill that role, absolutely, that would be fantastic.
Oh gosh, yeah.
But the honest truth of it is, a chatelaine has to be good at that themselves if they're going to be effective. They've got to know how to encourage people, and a big part of that is touching base with them regularly. If you have new people, coming to them and saying, "Hey, how's it going? I know you were really interested in, in learning, eagle like loom weaving and such. Have you done that yet? Have you met with this person? What did you think of it? Have you gotten any equipment?" And just kind of engaging them and asking them and getting their feedback, right?
And then our existing members too, reaching out to them and make sure, hey, I haven't seen you at any of the meetings lately. Are you okay? Is there something going on? What can I help with?
Exactly.
We miss having you there because X, Y, and Z, and nobody else knows X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Oh, and I absolutely, to this day, I still call up people. I'm like, "Hey, I'm going to practice today. Do you want to go? I'll give you a lift. Like, I'm going there anyway. You jump in my car. Let's just go ahead and go." And that's something that really is again, back to everyone is a chatelaine. Everyone can do that. And the way that I like to encourage it is, the things we do are always more fun with more people playing, right?
Definitely.
Like, if I'm standing in the field alone with a rapier, I'm pretty lonely. If I'm standing in the field with 2 rapier fighters, it's good. I'm going to have fun. But if I'm standing in the field with 15 rapier fighters, I'm going to have a lot more fun. There's a lot more things to do.
Definitely. But, is that something that would be good? Yeah, it would be nice to have a officer role that was dedicated to retention. However, once again, we have a hard enough time getting officers as chatelaines. So having one that's just retention, I think, is definitely something that needs to be looked at, but not necessarily something that can be solved when we already have a problem missing, a crucial role as is. So, chatelaines, what is your experience the hardest part about being a chatelaine in the SCA?
It's probably actually tied. There are 2 things that I think are the biggest challenges to being a chatelaine in the SCA. The one that is probably the biggest, constant pain in the rear is gold key and maintaining gold key. And for those groups who aren't familiar, who may use different terms, gold key is just basically loaner gear and loaner garb that you have that you use for new people. And every group does it differently, but I mean, they're most of them still do the same thing, which is kind of like, as members kind of develop their personas and decide they want to go new directions, they just kind of give you their old garb and they say, "Here, put this in gold key." And then, it gets logged into your group's possessions, and then you have to just keep after it. I'm not a fan of gold key. And I will get into that. Well, I'll go ahead and now.
Yeah, just dive in it right now.
Yeah, I think gold key is it's a great idea, but I think it's very ineffective. What I personally encourage is, instead of having a gold key, is take any of that garb, any of that old garb, One, go through it. Anything that really is just not in great shape, just get rid of it. I know people are like, well, it's better than nothing, but you know what? It really isn't. Like, if it's not in
No,
great shape, right?
because
Just
nobody
don't.
wants to wear something that's falling apart and feel
Right,
like, because we're all supposed to be nobility,
right,
and suddenly you've been gifted this at your first event, an item to wear for the day, and it's falling apart.
right. Exactly. And so yeah, so the first thing is go through your gold key and just get rid of anything that's not going to work or that is too much work, right? Like it's really great that somebody wanted to donate like their Elizabethan gown, and it's beautiful, but it's also like a size 0, and like 3 people maybe will fit into it, and it's rare, like for that person to come along. Something like that just it doesn't work well in gold key. And what I really think would be a better use of that
Okay.
would be to have a group yard sale at one of your events, like set up a merchant's tent and have a yard sale. And essentially, my idea is one, anybody who comes in can buy it for whatever cheap price you want to throw on it, just to get rid of it, right? But in our kingdom, particularly, we have newcomer badges. And we give our newcomers these newcomer badges they can wear. If somebody comes up with a newcomer badge, let them pick what they want. If they want to take it, it's theirs. Great. Get it out of here.
Nice.
And then to replace Gold Key, to have something available for people who are new and don't have garb. Have some simple tea tunics. Have a handful of simple tea tunics, in XXL down through small, in your group's colors, so that they're easily identifiable, so that anybody in your group can say, oh, hey, that's got to be a new person. They're wearing our colors, right? Just simple tea tunics that they can wear so they can get their feet wet. They can get an idea of what the group's about, but you don't have a lot of stuff to keep after, and you don't have a lot of investment of time in it. And then once those people are in, and once they like it, have a stitch night. Have a night where you have people come over and help them make, simple garb. It doesn't have to be super fancy from the beginning, right? You could sit somebody down, and again, going back to my experience, like bringing in college students, I at one time I had 4 or 5 young men that were all, really interested. They really wanted to be into heavy fighting and everything like that. They had no garb, they had no money, they had no anything. I'm okay, guys, I'm going to show you the trick. And I took them all, went to Goodwill. We found some cheap fabric and old blankets, and I showed them how to make really simple tea tunics. I'm like, you can do this on a sewing machine, but you can hand sew this just as easily. And got them so they were making their own garb. And again, that gives an investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It made them invest their time. They were putting their effort, their sweat, their, tears into building these things.
Potentially blood, if they
Potentially blood. Yeah, there was certainly blood. There was certainly people stabbing their fingers with needles and what have you. But then they were involved, and they felt proud when they were done. They put that tea tunic on, even though maybe it wasn't like the most historically accurate for what they were trying to do or what have you, but it fit the 10-foot rule.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that they put their time and effort into, and that kept them engaged. And once they do that, once they have that time and effort investment, they're in, because then they've done their part. And I've been on the opposite end, where I made really cool garb. Like I made a really fancy tea tunic, and I gave it to a new member, because they didn't have anything. And I'm like, well, here, try this, and it fit, looks good, great, it's yours to keep. And they're like, oh, this is so cool, I love it so much. I'm like, great, yeah. Saw them twice, and they were gone because they didn't have an investment in it, right?
Yep.
Like they showed up, and it was great, and they had fun, but it didn't have any kind of investment in the activities. Once they had that, that's where you keep people.
How do you determine how much of an investment is too much for a new player?
Well, I mean, so that's pretty easy. When it comes to how much of investment is too much for a new player, don't go fancy. Like if somebody comes in and they're like, I want to make a suit of armor. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's make you something that gets you on the field. We'll make a coat of plates, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, I really want to do like, a full set of Viennese plate. I'm like, so let's talk. Let's talk about effort. And let's talk about fighting. Let's talk about things, before you, and it's really a matter of being able to have that conversation with somebody, because people will do that. They absolutely, when I came in, that's what I wanted. I wanted a full suit of Milanese plate. I actually built a full suit of Milanese plate when I first started, and it looked very nice, because I had a measure of artistic skill. Its functionality was terrible. I was like C-3PO. I could barely move my arms and legs. I had no idea how armor worked. If I had had the right person introduce me to the right armorers, I would have been like, oh, they would have said, hey, no, let's start basic. Let's get you on the field. Let's see if you even like fighting before we put a lot of effort into a suit of armor. And so that's kind of the key. Before you put a lot of effort in, try it first. Get them doing the activity, before you agree to make them, that fancy tutor, outfit with the cool puffy pants and everything like that. Like, be like, hey, before we make this, why don't you try things out? And also, we're in Georgia. See what you think about the heat of an event before we decide in what direction you want to go in.
I will agree. For newcomers, the consideration of, hey, I want this garb, I want it so bad, but not knowing climate, materials, and their effect, and the type of events, the majority of the type of the events.
Right.
Makes a big difference. Like for me, for example, I'm in Montana. Montana in the winters are very cold.
Right.
If I wanted to go to travel 2 events out of my barony, it's a minimum, 3-hour drive.
Right.
So generally more. If I want to go to an event and I wanted to do Elizabethan, I gotta have space for all that.
Right.
Okay.
And that's a huge consideration. And there's also the consideration of if you encourage them to go too big too quickly, and then they find out it doesn't work for them, then they just quit. Because they feel like they've wasted effort. You don't ever want anybody to feel like they've wasted their efforts.
No, definitely not. I kind of have this philosophy like, hey, you got to try everything you can. That doesn't mean you have to try it, as deeply as somebody who's practiced and done the same thing for, 20 years.
Right.
So I'm not going to go buy the most expensive paints I could use, the, top of the line, highest carat, gold leafing to gild a scroll when I, maybe have only just started doing it. That would be silly.
Right.
So start with what you can that's reasonable.
Precisely. And being able to kind of manage those expectations, right? Like that is a big key that a lot of people don't think about as chatelaine, is managing people's expectations, letting them know, hey, you're not going to step on the field and be the best fighter right away. It's not going to happen.
No, Aslak points out that he feels that this applies to every endeavor. Oh my goodness, I cannot speak today. To try out the basics first, then get fancy. I mean, you got to suck when you first.
Absolutely.
You might be better than other people, but you're still going to suck. You're never going to be amazing right first time out the bat.
Right. And that's even people who have, a very close experience. Like I've seen people who were fantastic Golden Gloves boxers, right? And they were really good at boxing. And Golden Gloves boxing shares a lot in common with heavy fighting as far as foot movement and body movement and body mechanics. You're still going to suck because you've never worn armor before. And it's a change. It's different.
And chances are the first couple sets of armor aren't going to be customized to you exactly.
Right. You're going to be wearing loaner gear. It's going to fit weird, and it's going to, it does the best it can. It'll protect you, but you're going to get out there, and it's not going to move with your body the way you want it to. And so your experience will not be, you won't come out there and be the best of the best. Making sure people understand that, but also making sure that we're not going to hurt you, we're not going to break our toys, is also important, right? And from a heavy fighter standpoint, that's a huge thing. Like, if you're a heavy fighter, whether you're a chatelaine or not, if you've got a new guy stepping on the field, this is not your chance to win everything. This is your chance to teach and to kind of get somebody experiencing what it's like, and you let them hit you,
And there's a difference between like a person's first, heavy fighting event, and they're interested in heavy fighting as a crown tournament. You're not gonna,
Right, exactly.
That's not the right format to be like, okay, yeah, jump in there. No, you need to be a paid member. B, you should be, depending on the Capora and the rules, a member for so long. But at the same time, like, yes, it's great to bring them to watch. Maybe a one-on-one pickup fight with somebody afterwards.
Right.
But don't put them in their first tournament bear pit type thing for their first time in armor.
Right. No, they shouldn't ever be, honestly, my opinion is a brand new person should never be in armor at their first event. Unless they've been going to a lot of fighter practices. Like if they've been going to fighter practices for a couple of years, but at that point, are they really a new member?
Correct.
If they're brand new, they don't need to be an armored event. Now, what they can do is you can see if you've got some fighters who are willing to let them throw some shots at them.
Yes.
And the fighter just stands there and blocks it. So they can see what it's like to swing a sword in combat. But they're not getting geared up, because even a really experienced fighter, if they're real amped up for a tournament or real amped up from a war, they may not be the best person to teach fighting at that moment.
Well, maybe it ringing somebody's bell the very first time they're in armor is not the way to do it. If you want to discourage somebody, that's going to chase them off.
Right.
Like, as a female, genetically cis person, I'm not as tall as people in my barony. I'm short to begin with, like the bottom of average height. I'm 5'4". So naturally shorter. My first time in armor, had somebody hit my helmet as hard as they could, I would have just walked away and been like, nope, sorry. Luckily, it was another female individual who put me in the armor and said, okay, I am going to give you a leg shot just so you can kind of see. Now, this is going to be a good shot, but it's not going to be super hard, and kind of told me what to expect.
Right.
And they threw it. They made me very comfortable with the situation. And I was like, okay, so anything that harder, I should probably take. All right. And then that was the only time that they had me get hit. The rest of the time, they were my pal.
Right.
So, and same with art. I mean, if you have a class and you have, newcomers or sit down in a class and you expect them to do the same thing that everybody who's been playing multiple years, you're not going to get that. You give somebody needle and thread and some fabric and tell them, hey, I need you to do some overcast stitching. And they're going to go, what?
Right.
They don't know. They've never done it.
Right.
I need you to do a buttonhole stitch. What?
Yeah.
They don't know. They might know, but might call it something else. You don't know.
Right. And that's exactly it. It applies to every aspect of what we do. Start little, like get them involved in the basics. I know, like sometimes it's even just like taking, some things that aren't going to actually be used for something, like say, okay, you want somebody to be interested in illumination. Well, illumination's a lot like painting, like a coloring book. Let's start you off on painting and see the kind of the techniques and some of these things, and so you understand how it works, and you slowly build up their skill set until they're doing cool illumination stuff, right? Temper their understandings. They don't think they're going to jump in and be, making awesome medieval manuscripts from the start, because they won't. But they might do really, really well if you start them with the basics.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, and also there's that opportunity too, depending on, not so much in the martial, but definitely when it comes to arts, to have kind of like a table at events where there are supplies where people can just kind of play with them to kind of gauge where they're at and what they can do. And then from there go, oh gosh, hey, I saw that you were doing this at open craft, corner. And oh my goodness, if you ever are interested in learning how to, do illuminations, come talk to so-and-so. They're great at it. Or, hey, I saw that cross stitch you whipped out on that scrap linen that's not even made to do cross stitch on. Your black work would be incredible. You should talk with so-and-so.
Right.
There's opportunities to kind of gauge where people are at in a kind of relaxed kind of manner.
Right. Exactly. Kind of removing the pressure of, well, you've got to do X, Y, or Z, right? Like just let them play. Let people play. That is a huge part of it, Here's
a good comment from Sava Go Viking. They had a brand new person at their practice today, and they got absolutely swarmed by folks trying to be helpful. How do you kindly tell veteran Skadians to back off and let a newbie breathe?
That is a fantastic question. Um,
Yes.
Honestly, probably the best way to do it is to have a conversation with the people that are going to be at things like fighter practices, and so they have an understanding. Like, we're part of a group, right? We're a group of people. It's way easier for a new person to have a single point of contact. To have one person that is kind of showing them the ropes. And it is totally fine if that person comes to you and says, "Hey, Bob, can you help me show this person this really cool shot you throw?" Awesome. Let that person be the person who asks that question. Because if you swarm the new people, they're gonna panic. They're gonna freak out.
And as a former chalet, one of the techniques I like to do was, introduce them to the one person, and then as I see the other people coming up, kind of grab those other people and be like, "Oh, it's okay. Let's have just this person talk to them today. Next week maybe you can be that one person.
Right. Absolutely.
Different perspectives. Yeah, because it's not that everybody's information isn't valid and worthwhile. It's just that when you meet new people, your brain can only take in so much from one media.
Right. Precisely that. So that would be the answer to that is just have conversations with people. Make sure that your group, that the people who are there understand, like, hey, we get new people in. This person is the person who's going to assign them a point of contact. And if you don't have, like, if your shadowing doesn't go to your fighter practices, make sure somebody at that practice is the official person to do that. And that way that you kind of keep it from being too overwhelming.
Definitely. Oh, here's another one, different good point from Aslak. My first Kingdom Bard competition, I had no idea what I was getting into. Luckily, people were kind, but I was so out of my depth, it was ridiculous. It would have been better if I had been told what level this competition was, but kindness goes a long way. I think that this is super, super valid, regardless of Shadowlane status or not. Everybody was new once.
Right.
Be kind. Even if they're not new, be kind.
Right.
Just be kind.
And that is so very, very important. And not just the kindness. Like, kindness is key, obviously. Like, that's how you keep people around, is you're kind. Kindness speaks to everyone. But also, if there's a big event or something going like that on, if there's something like a Kingdom Bards competition, and your newcomer express interest in it, then yeah, like, they say, hey, so this is a kind of a high level competition. These are people who have really practiced these things and are really into it. It is an open, like, so if it's an open tournament or competition, then say, yeah, you absolutely can enter it, but understand that these are being judged on a level that you may not be experienced with yet. But maybe, like, if you're really interested in this, why don't we come to Bardic Circle tonight and let's try it out. Let's see what you think. Again, start small. Don't jump in the deep end. Start in the shallow end. See if you like the water. And if you like the water, if you like the Bardic Circle, then hey, maybe next year let's do the Kingdom Bard competition.
Definitely. That's a really good strategy to kind of, like, hey, if you're interested in doing this, maybe you don't want to jump in this year. Let's watch. Let's go hang out and do something with them. That way you kind of know what you're going to get into before you get into it.
Right.
We have another comment along the same lines from Alfric. This is something I've encountered a lot since starting. Everyone assumes that everyone already understands what things are and what level of experience or expertise is expected. As a newer person, it often feels very awkward to have to jump in and ask what sounds like a really basic question when you don't know what you may or may not be understanding.
Right. I will tell you right now, that is something that's kind of endemic to the entire organization. We tend to assume a lot. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody get called up for an award, and I'm like, what? They didn't have that award? I thought they did. They already do all this stuff. How did they not have that award? I made that assumption. I didn't look, right? as a Shadowlane, and this is, let me preface this by saying, a Shadowlane can't be everywhere, and they can't do everything, right?
No. We try to be superheroes, but it doesn't always happen.
Right. If you've got a good-sized event, and you've got maybe 10 or 15 new people at that event, you can't handwalk all of them.
No.
You can't. But what you can do, and is kind of vital and important, again, I'm going to point to my kingdom because I think we do a lot of really good things Shadowlane-wise here. Newcomer badges. Newcomer badges are awesome. If you have something that people can look and they instantaneously know, hey, that person is new, and if you explain to your newcomers, hey, this badge means you can ask whatever you want, right? Like you can ask any question. It doesn't matter. If you think it's silly or stupid, doesn't matter. Ask the question. Somebody will see the badge and say, hey, or just, encourage them, say, hey, I'm new. What does this mean?
And I think it's great having that system where there's that badge that says, hey, I probably don't know why everything is going on or how it's done and the history behind it. Maybe there's an ambassador of the SCA somewhere at this event that would like to take me by the hand and take me on a wild adventure.
Right, exactly. And again, as Shadowlane, sometimes that's the key is like if you've got a bunch of new people, figure out who you can assign them to for the day. Like if you got a bunch of people at your event, figure out what people are going to be around that are going to be able to kind of guide them in those directions. Say, hey, you're really interested in this. We're going to kind of split everybody up as we go. We're going to kind of walk as a group trip. And it's kind of like being a school teacher on a field trip, right? You got to take people to where they need to go, and you kind of drop people off in different directions as you go. And that's kind of how you have to handle it.
And it's a really good opportunity because we have players that maybe are feeling disenfranchised, who are older players, who maybe are feeling a little alienated, who have a wealth of knowledge that are looking for that opportunity to be engaged. And by being an ambassador and pairing them with a brand new person might be the one thing to do that's going to make both the newcomer and the existing players, event that much better.
Right. The only thing that I would add as a caveat there is you got to know your people.
You do have to know your people.
Yeah, you don't want to hook them up with the person who's so disenfranchised that they're just gonna talk smack the whole time.
No. Right? That is true.
Right. You got to, and there's gonna be people who do that, and it's not because they're bad. It's not because they're not a valid part or a valuable part of the organization. But maybe they're really burned out on something, and maybe that's not the person to put them with right now. Yeah. Or at least not put them with alone. Maybe that's somebody you come up to them and say, hey, Frank, let's talk about this really cool, like the sandstone carving you're doing. Can you tell me more about sandstone? And just be involved in it in that way. But maybe not make them like the ambassador for all things SCA. Because
no, not saying for all things SCA.
Right.
We have another comment here, and I think that's Wistrick that is commenting. His Excellency says SCA loves its jargon, and our websites are impenetrable to someone who doesn't speak our language.
Yes.
So yes, this is something that I've looked at and tried to come up with a good solution. I almost think, and this might just be my opinion, and we'll let you voice yours too, Mark, is that anytime there's a jargon word on our website, there should be a hyperlink to literally an actual dictionary of our jargon.
Oh. Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Bam, what does this word mean? Let me click on it. Large ass means, oh, hey, cool. Now I know, versus just guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 1,000%. I think that is absolutely something that websites should do, right? But also, I think that groups really need to work hard to make sure that their homepage, the first page you get to, is a newcomer page. Every time. It should be something that is very friendly to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Yes. And then breaks things down and gives them that information. And maybe have a separate link for the page for people who know what they're doing. Right?
So like a newcomers page and the group page. Have them two separate pages.
Exactly. So that, or just have it somewhere very, very clear where it says, hey, new here, click this button. Come to this area. That way there, we'll get you to where you need to go. Right. And without all the fancy jargon and everything like that. But that is vital If people
Definitely.
can't find that information, especially in this day and age, they're just not going to show up because they're going to be like,
Mhm.
no, I don't know this. I don't know what any of this is. I don't know what any of this means. I don't have the time or energy to invest in it.
I just wanted to do the fighting thing and wear the really cool clothes and have a good time. That's all I cared
Right.
about. And now you've given me all the bylaws and Kaporas, whatever this is, and
Yeah,
yeah,
and what the heck is anesthesiatus anyway?
yeah, like who does that? What is that? So yeah, no, I agree. Jargon, whether it happens to be on a website or at that newcomer's first experience, try as a chatelaine or even as an individual when a newcomer comes up to you, don't throw jargon at them.
Right.
Use regular, common nomenclature. Use your regular words.
Right.
If I call it a thingamabob and nobody else calls it a thingamabob and they show up and I'm trying to tell them about a thingamabob, but the thingamabob happens to be a fork.
Precisely. Yep.
Why don't I just say fork?
Yeah.
You know?
It is often like, we use terms like in the essay, we use terms like mundane. As it turns out, there's not a lot of people in the mundane world who know what mundane means. So, like being able to say, outside of the SCA, it sounds better than, mundanely, I am known as, because like, what does mundanely mean? Like,
exactly. Or like you're describing parts of armor. You tell somebody you have to wear a gorget. Why call it a gorget on their first time rather than say throat protection?
Right.
Or armor for my throat to protect my throat.
Right. Exactly.
Calling something, for the garment. Maybe they don't know what a kirtle is. Maybe you could just say it's a very form-fitted dress. You don't have to go into detail. Use words that everybody can use.
Right. Precisely that. Like it's that whole thing. I mentioned that, I come from a career background in documentation management. Kind of the key rule for documentation management, for documentation in general, is aim for the lowest common denominator, right? The stuff that you're describing, the stuff that you're talking to people about needs to be able to be understood by somebody who knows nothing.
Definitely.
And that's the key.
Definitely. I agree. Gosh, I've got so many ideas. I'm like, I'm not chatelaine anymore. Shoot. I'm gonna talk about chatelaine.
Same here. Like, I'm not chatelaine anymore either. I'm like, I'm not a group chatelaine. We have a very talented chatelaine. They're amazing. But it doesn't mean that coming up with ideas isn't valid, because guess what? You can still share them. You can still go to Chatelaine and say, hey, you know what? We had this really cool conversation the other night. And like, here's some of the points. What do you think of them? And kind of, involve it.
Well, gosh. Yeah, definitely. All of our viewers that have chimed in with information, my shout out tonight is, I'm giving it earlier. I'm giving my shout out to our viewers tonight who gave us their feedback and their questions and their statements, because these are really good and they definitely help the conversation for retention and engagement. And here's another one. Yep. Aslak says the biggest problem with jargon is that we don't always know we're using it. It's true. Kindness rules. So if a newcomer realizes they can ask any question without being ridiculed, they can call out jargon.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, what that comes back down to is being able to identify your newcomers, which again comes back to my whole thing with Gold Key. If they're wearing garb that is in your group's colors and everybody knows that's newbie garb, right? You know who they are. You can identify them. If you can identify them, then you know they have no stupid questions.
Well, something that helps identify newcomers that's not specific as to just their face, because you can go to a fighter practice and somebody can say, oh, who's so-and-so? And you're like, oh yeah, they've been at, 6 fighter practices that you just haven't been at because you've been out of town.
Yeah. I could tell you probably one of the funniest experiences I ever had as a fairly new person myself was I went to a fighter practice one day, and there was this guy there that I've never seen before. And, And I didn't know who he was, and I knew everybody in our local group because I talked to everybody. And so I'm like, and so I went up to him. I'm talking to him. I'm like, hey, hi, are you new here? And he turned around, he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm new here. I'm like, cool. I'm like, well, I'm kind of new too, but let me tell you about what we're doing. And I go into this whole spiel, and he's like, oh, that's really cool. And then we get up to fight, and it turns out he's Duke John the Mad Kilt, and he had never been to that practice before.
But at the same time, you did what you were supposed to do.
I was supposed to do, and it was a fantastic experience. It was really, really great. He had a great sense of humor about it.
He is a wizard, Cal. He is a wizard.
He is. But that's the point. You can't rely on what you know of faces, right? You don't know who's going to be, a brand newbie and who's basically helped kind of create the organization you're in.
Exactly.
So,
well, and that's one of the things about travel. When you don't play with just your own group and you get outside, you have that opportunity to be a chatelaine for the society, and at the same time see and experience as a newcomer once again what a newcomer experiences when they go to a different place.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. So my shout out got stolen already by our audience, who are incredible. Do you have a shout out, Mark?
Honestly, there's so many people that I could shout out that it would take forever to list. So really what my shout out is going to go to is to everyone who makes that effort, who reaches out to a new person and says something kind and teaches them something or gets them in the right direction. Because all of us were new at some point. All of us were at that point where we didn't know what we were doing, and we had somebody take our hand and take us in that direction. I know personally, I'll tell you what, I'll call out the three people who probably did the most for me. The Honorable Lady Marie Gautreau, who was the Seneschal and Chatelaine of the Shire of Tyrbrist when I first started. The Honorable Lord Colin de Montfort, who was one of the first heavy fighters to take me under his wing and kind of teach me the ropes and teach me all this stuff. And the Honorable Lord Giovanni Francisco de Valencia, who, when I moved into the group, I had just happened to pick the same name as him, and he just immediately was like, "Hey, you're my brother now. It's official. We're family." And we built a relationship that lasted, decades of cooperation and doing funny, silly stuff together because, he took a chance. He didn't know who I was. I just happened to pick the same, last name as him, and he thought it was really funny to pretend that we were brothers. And it's when you do things like that, when you make a newcomer feel like they're part of the group, part of the family from the start, right? And you make them feel included and involved and important, even when they don't know anything, and you make sure they get a chance to shine. Those are the people we need to call out all the time, because you're doing the job. You're doing what every chatelaine should be doing.
I agree 100%. Thank you. Now to get to some business here. If you want to help support KK Productions, you can hit us up at www.patreon.com/KK Productions, and you can choose to support us as a rook, a knight, or a bishop. We also have amazing merchandise that you can purchase if you want to support the show at Redbubble, where our stickers, our bling, our patches, get the sheets. You could sleep in a pair of Do Something Nightly sheets if you really so chose. If you want to see what Cal's up to on TikTok, you can reach him at CalBard. If you want to see what I'm doing on TikTok, you can find me at GinaKits. And if you want to see what's coming up on KK Productions, we have 3 Former Fat Guys on June 16th. This is the show that they've moved the date so many times. So there's this anticipation of awesome that is going to be brought. We also have Coffee with Cal on June 19th. Rule number 1. What do we think this is? Could be lots of different rules. I don't have a next guest scheduled, but don't you worry. Road to Retention with Rahmut is not going anywhere anytime soon. I've got lots more to talk about. I want to thank once again our guest. Thank you, Your Excellency. You've been amazing and a pleasure. I've enjoyed having you on. And our audience as always. And of course, Cal, our super producer. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Bye, all.